Hey, good morning. Good Saturday morning, everybody. It's about 6:12. Yeah, I've been up for a little bit, for a little while now. But I was gonna try to do this yesterday, but I was busy doing a lot of things. I was mowing, what little grass we have in our backyard, which for some odd reason during the spring and early to mid spring and mostly through the fall and the winter and late fall and throughout the winter go is all green and everything. But as soon as we get into late spring, into mid to late spring, and almost into summer, it turns into a small little desert, if you know what I mean. But anyway, I was out doing that yesterday, and I was also out getting some soda from Walmart. So I really didn't have time to do this. I mean, I could have had time, but it was just so warm yesterday, folks. I just did not feel like doing anything really. But anyway, you could see the title down below, and it says Scooby-Doo fan, and there's going to be a link provided. It says Scooby-Doo fans. It says Scooby-Doo fans and put together a timeline, or it's going to say something along the lines of SD fans, which are Scooby-Doo fans, putting together a Shaggy slash Daphne timeline. Now, you're probably wondering what that means. Well, very, very simply, folks. You pretty much know this by now, not just through my videos, but you look on YouTube, you look throughout here on YouTube. You take a look throughout DeviantArt and Google and all that, and you pretty much can pretty much confirm, if not come across a lot of Shaggy, Daphne fans. Now, it may not seem like it, but they are out there. Now, here's the thing, though. I talked about, I talked about how I'm a supporter of the pairing myself. I am. As a matter of fact, one of my attractions to 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, and the reason I enjoyed it, and the reason I enjoyed all new Scooby-Doo / new Scooby-Doo mysteries was because of Daphne and Shaggy. I mean, for some reason, like many fans, I always felt that they had the best chemistry together. They were the best team. It's kind of like with Rescue Rangers. When they would team Dale and Gadget up, when they would split up themselves, you would always help. At times you'd always get sometimes Dale with Monterey or Chip with Dale and all that. But anytime they split the team up and it was Dale with Gadget, either split up accidentally or purposely to search for different clues all over the place, or even if it was in support of each other, you were always glad about that, because you said to yourself, because to you, because you basically said to yourself, because to you, it was just another indication that Dale Gadget was a possibility, could happen, and even to this day, I think, a lot of people get some air in here. A lot of people feel that way. A lot of people feel, that way, and the same goes for Shaggy and Daphne. When new mysteries came around, and all new Scooby-Doo, Scrappy-Doo, and new Scooby-Doo mysteries, and then 13 Ghosts, it's like, for some odd reason, I almost felt like people favored those shows, and obviously they did, more than the previous shows that came before it. Now you might say to yourself, well, what does this have to do with trying to construct a timeline? Well, apparently this one person says that they and a friend had been watching Scooby-Doo, and this was actually done I think earlier this year. Yeah, it was actually earlier this year they did this. And they said that they themselves that they and a friend earlier this year have been trying to construct a timeline, if you will, a timeline. Okay, this is what they said. Right? Let me correct that. This is what they said. Let me get a drink of water here. That kind of usually helps out. Much better. But this is what they're saying, and I quote. This is what this one person says. You'll see who it is when I provide the link, and you can click on it. It says, this is what they said, and I quote. So a friend and I, basically what they're saying is that a friend and that they and a friend, okay, that basically what they're saying is they, along with a friend, have been watching Scooby-Doo for the past few days. And again, this was back in January. It looks like it. I think it's back in January. Let me see. Yeah, back in January. This is back in January. They said they had been watching Scooby-Doo for the past couple of days this past January. And she agreed with them about how the couple is pretty awesome, Shaggy Daphne. And they've been trying to put together a timeline that ends with 13 Ghosts and the HB era of Scooby-Doo. And then they ask if anybody has any ideas. Now, in case some of you are wondering, well, what do they mean by HB era? Basically, what they mean is when Hanna-Barbera was directly, if not front and center involved with Scooby-Doo. Pretty much saying that when Hanna-Barbera, even back in the early to mid 80s, had the final say, was calling the shots. And that's basically what they're talking about. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. Pup Named Scooby-Doo was part of Hanna-Barbera. Yeah, but that was more like a prequel, and not a lot of people count Pup Named Scooby-Doo because of the fact that even though it's supposed to take place when they're kids, almost like in the 50s or 60s kind of deal, it had some modern technology, so that really didn't help out a lot. All right. Another fan basically looked at this and said that basically, since this individual had questions about the timeline of Shaggy Daphne, or Shaphne, as they call it for short, that they've come to the right place, and that this is how they gave their opinion. This is a person that I already talked about. They know who they are. They're here on YouTube. You can find them. You can find them under the same name. But this is what they referenced for, this is the references for a timeline. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You is SD Way, SDWAY. New Scooby-Doo Movies is NSD-Movies. Scooby-Doo Show is SDS. Scooby All-Stars is SAS. Scooby-Doo Scrappy-Doo Show is SDSDS. New Scooby-Doo Scrappy-Doo Show, or New Scooby Scrappy-Doo Show, is NSSDS. New Scooby-Doo Mysteries is NSDM. And 13 Ghosts is 13GSD. Yeah, it's basically how they would work on a timeline with references. Like if you didn't know basically what they're saying is, okay, if you see SD Way or 13GSD, that stands for a certain show. And then this is what they said. And this is what they said in response. First of all, and this is what they said in response, and I quote, "First, there were unknown mysteries that the gang solved before Scooby-Doo Where Are You? We know this because in What a Night for a Night, Fred says it looks like they have a, underline, another mystery on their hands. We also know that Shaggy and Daphne were good friends already. He compliments her on using her mind, quote unquote, that's using the old noodle. And she praises his skills as a gymnast and believes in him. However, it is also known from Mystery Mask Mix-Up that Daphne either had many boyfriends or at least had a lot of guys trying to win her over. Shaggy jokes that Daphne is looking to scare up a couple of new boyfriends. Fred has a strange grin on his face as if he knows something about that. Alright, towards the end of Where Are You? It seems clear that Fred and Daphne were dating. In the earlier episodes, they danced together. In later episodes, they even danced hand in hand. Also during the series, it's obvious that Velma is taking an interest in Shaggy, though he doesn't seem to return these feelings. He puts off dancing with her to try catching a catfish with a rubber mouse. Yeah. Also, when dancing with Velma, he keeps stepping on her foot until Scooby cuts in, and Shaggy dances away from her with Scooby. The last things to mention are that Shaggy and Daphne continue to show similarities, continue to speak to each other the most. Both have a close friendship with Scooby-Doo, and Daphne spent time to make the Shaggy snack and revealed it as a surprise to him, which means she guessed at what kinds of things he would like, and she was right. All right. Okay, now what that obviously means. Now, if you read the first part there, about the fact that it says that obviously Fred and Daphne were dating, and Velma was taking interest in Shaggy. You can kind of get the idea of what you kind of have pretty much a good idea as to where they got, where a lot of the writers for the past few years have been getting inspiration from. They haven't been getting it from Scooby-Doo show. They haven't been getting it. They haven't been getting it much from Scooby-Doo show or the movies or wherever. They've been getting it straight from the original show. And that's probably why a lot of fans are not too happy, because they're pretty much depending on the first show instead of really taking a close look and going with what they had, going with references and examples from other shows. All right. Next thing they say is, quote, in the new Scooby-Doo movies, Fred and Daphne are still dating. Though Daphne shows jealousy when she thinks that Shaggy and Scooby are in love with Jeannie, also a redhead. But when Shaggy shows that he was just being nice to Jeannie and wishes for food, Daphne doesn't act jealous anymore, even though Scooby overly shows that he's in love with Jeannie. Daphne even laughs at this, thus showing that Daphne's concern was over Shaggy being in love with Jeannie, not Scooby being in love with her. There are other examples of closeness nicely placed all throughout this season, as well as other Shaggy Daphne hints, such as Shaggy being brave when Mr. Hyde captures Daphne. He wants to get her back, or in one of the Don Knotts episodes, where both Shaggy and Daphne both get up at night to get something to eat and say the same thing as to why they should despite there being a ghost. They are in different locations when they say this, which means they both think the same way. However, the last episode of the season shows Fred with his arm around Daphne and his hand resting on her hip. This indicates that they were still dating. However, Fred forgot all about her when she disappeared and a ghost showed up in her place. In Scooby-Doo show, SDS as they call it, Fred and Daphne are no longer dating. We know this because in episode Mamba Wamba and the Voodoo Hoodoo, Daphne excitedly announced that she will split up with the lead singer of the band that the gang is helping solve a mystery. I keep forgetting his name, Alan or something, I think. Anyway, her wanting to go with him and then later the two of them getting close when confronted by the villains shows that Daphne is not Fred's girlfriend anymore. So Fred and Daphne broke up at some time between the end of the Scooby-Doo movies and Scooby-Doo show. During and after the season, Daphne seems to be taking a stronger interest in Shaggy, though she's still quite shy in expressing it. I would say Daphne split with Fred and took interest in Shaggy before Scooby-Doo show started. Since in the first episode, high-rise hair raiser, she is sitting next to him in the pizza parlor and agrees with him on finding work. The season also has more examples of Shaggy and Daphne being closer together, having similarities, or being nice to each other. Daphne also dances with Scooby in Harum Scarum Sanctum, thus showing a close bond with Scooby again. The two closest characters to Scooby-Doo are Shaggy and Daphne. Scooby All-Stars doesn't show all that much, but there is some Shaggy Daphne, and I don't think there's any Fred Daphne. In the diabolical disc demon, Shaggy appears through an air vent, and Daphne is smiling happily at him. Scooby-Doo Scrappy-Doo show has an episode called The Hairy Scare of the Devil Bear, where Shaggy is attacked but escapes. The gang runs in, and Daphne asks him if he's okay. Then she helps him up by herself, while the others wonder where the bear went. In another episode, I Left My Neck in San Francisco, Daphne is feeling ill, so she goes back to the hotel. Shaggy thinks he sees Daphne out walking the street and is worried about her. He goes after her only to discover that it's a vampire. He then worries that Daphne's turned into a vampire. In these two episodes, it shows that Shaggy and Daphne worry about each other, which means they truly care about each other. And just when Shaggy and Daphne seem to be getting close, the gang breaks up. Okay, so you could pretty much tell that, with the timeline this individual has, that they're saying that between the timelines between the shows, Where Are You in the Scooby-Doo movies, the Where Are You show and the Scooby-Doo movie show, pretty much to them, Fred and Daphne were still a pairing, but in a sense, when you started watching a little bit of, the Scooby-Doo movies, basically you were seeing some hints of interest, maybe attractiveness, if you will, between both Daphne and Shaggy. However, that was it, because as they say pretty much in one of the last episodes, you have Fred's arm and hand around Daphne's hip. But then when they get to Scooby-Doo show and Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo show, they pretty much say that there's a stronger interest there because Daphne, between the Scooby-Doo movies and Scooby-Doo show, her and Fred were no longer an item. And that she was showing more concern, she was showing more interest in the likes of Shaggy. Even going as far as to dance with Scooby, because if you're dancing with somebody's pet, in this case Scooby-Doo, then you're pretty much showing that, hey, I care about this animal as if it's my own, but also I care about its owner very much. I mean, if you want a good if you want a if you want sort of a recent example, well, maybe not as recent, try Monster of Mexico. When they get to Fred's pen pal's place, and they're looking out the door, thinking, well, wait a minute, isn't this small cabin his home? Who is looking out that door on one side, on the left side, with Daphne, or with Scooby? Daphne. Exactly. Kind of gave it away there. I'm sorry. But you kind of get the idea. Now, they go on to mention that after the Scooby-Doo Scrappy-Doo show, the first season, if you will, basically, and I quote, this is what they said, this leads us to the episodes where it's just Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy. They worked for Shaggy's uncle, Fearless. They worked for Shaggy's Uncle Fearless at his detective agency. They did odd jobs all over before this. While working as detectives, they fought a few big-time super criminals. And then they mention, continuing on, and I quote, In the Scooby Scrappy Puppy Hour, we see Shaggy on a date with a new girl. And he also has another girl beside her that he promised a date with on the same day. So he has Scooby date the second girl since she can't see without her glasses. Sound familiar? And basically what this person's indicating is that instead of dating the girl that needs glasses to see, that basically Shaggy would rather be with the other girl, which obviously is supposed to be like a representation of Daphne, and he'd rather stick Scooby with the girl that can't see, that's kind of a representation of Velma. And then it mentions that Shaggy also goes back in time and meets a cave woman named Dula, who takes a forceful liking to him. Now, pretty much with that out of the way, this is what they talk. Pretty much with that out of the way, here's where things get interesting. And I quote this individual. They say, then we have the glorious, you hear what they call it, glorious? Yeah. The glorious new Scooby-Doo, then we have the glorious new Scooby Scrappy-Doo show, where Daphne reunites with Shaggy and the Doos. We don't know how long they spent together before the first episode, but it could have been a while since Daphne has them all stay the night at a supposedly haunted house, which is really haunted. Seems like a pretty personal thing to do. They travel all over the world together to help Daphne with her career as a reporter. There is more of the friendly banter between them, just like old times. They also attend a carnival together thrown by the old high school Central High in Scooby the Barbarian. Okay. They also attend a carnival together thrown by the old high school Central High. In Scooby the Barbarian, Shaggy infiltrates a barbarian stronghold in order to save Daphne, but she and Scrappy save themselves. She still thanks him for coming to rescue them, however. She still thanks him, I should say, for coming to rescue them, however. In The Mark of Scooby, they sleep next to each other in separate sleeping bags. This suggests that they are dating, as sleeping that close together was unheard of in the first few seasons. In New Scooby-Doo Mysteries, in New Scooby-Doo movies, Speed Buggy episode, Shaggy, Scooby, and Fred were forced to sleep outside the Mystery Machine on a windy night. Hold on, okay. In the Scooby-Doo movies episode Speed Buggy, Shaggy, Scooby, and Fred were forced to sleep outside the Mystery Machine on a windy night. Yet, in this season, the all-new Scooby-Doo Scrappy-Doo season, Shaggy and Daphne sleep right next to each other. Now, you might continue on that what this individual says, and I quote, "Now you might say, but they didn't sleep in different rooms in these episodes." Oh, okay. Now, they pretty much know people are going to ask something right about now, so this is how they counter it. This is what they say, and I quote, "Now you might say, but didn't they sleep in different rooms in these episodes?" Alright, now here's the answer. Here's the counter. This is explained depending on the situation. In the Hound of Scoobyvilles, they stay at a man's house as guests. Being old school like he is, he probably has a rule about unmarried couples sleeping in separate rooms. Shaggy and Daphne respect that. Or in Scooby-Doo and the Cyclops, Ops 2, the hotel offered them separate rooms at no extra charge, since all the hotel didn't have any guests. So taking advantage of the situation was to their benefit, or so they thought. In Scooby of the Jungle, Shaggy comes up with a plan to save Daphne from a huge ape, and it works. He also saves all of them from the villain. Okay, now what this individual is saying is basically what the whole sleeping next to each other in the sleeping bags, I mean, pretty much live action or animated, whatever you want to call it, you're pretty much sleeping together, but not physically. You're just sleeping right next to each other because you're dating. That's pretty much as they look at it. If you weren't dating, you'd be like, okay, out of respect, because we're just friends and we're helping each other out, you sleep in the van, I'll sleep outside. End of story. Just like in the Speed Buggy episode that they gave an example of. But because they slept outside together means, obviously, to what this individual says, is they're dating. Because if that wasn't the case, Daphne would have been inside the van. But you get the idea. All right, continuing on what this individual says, and I quote, "In No Thanks, Masked Manx, Daphne takes Shaggy and the dudes to her parents' house for vacation. Shaggy hits it off well with the parents, and they both approve of him and enjoy his company. Shaggy and Daphne dance together at the party, and Shaggy makes Daphne laugh." Okay, now in case you're wondering what that means and how she makes him laugh, basically, what happens is, in case you've seen the episode, and you can probably pretty much find it here on YouTube, they arrive at her parents' house for a vacation, like they mentioned, but they arrive just in time for a costume party. So she goes as a cowgirl, he goes as a knight in shining armor. And the little plot there with his costume, the little joke there, the little in-joke with Shaggy's costume, is the helmet part, the little visor part on the helmet keeps falling, keeps closing shut on him. And while they're dancing, he says, he basically says, and I quote, because I have this episode, he says, and I quote, "Now this is what I call twist and squeak," and then the visor just shuts, and she laughs. Now, she's not laughing at him, he's just basically, he's making fun of the fact that his Costume squeaks a lot, and then bam, down comes the visor. And it's not a like make fun of laugh, it's a giggling laugh, like an attraction laugh. Do you know what I'm saying? That's what they're trying to say. All right. Next up, and I continue, quote, in Where's Scooby-Doo, Part 1 and 2, Shaggy and Daphne stay in the same train car. Only one fold-out bed is shown in the episode, but there could have been another one. Also, there are couches. So it isn't known for sure that they slept in the same bed, but they did sleep in the same car. In Wedding Bell Booze, Part 1 and 2, Shaggy takes Daphne to his parents' house for his sister's wedding. Daphne made Shaggy snacks for the family. There are also presents in the mystery machine, which, as so-and-so, and no offense to that individual, pointed out, means that Daphne probably helped Shaggy shop and wrap gifts. Basically, this season shows that Shaggy and Daphne do everything together. There are also numerous instances of physical contact with each other. Most of this meets or exceeds any contact that Fred and Daphne ever shared. It is safe to conclude that Shaggy and Daphne are a couple. All right, continuing on. The new Scooby-Doo mystery show, the new Scooby-Doo's mysteries, again, shows that they do everything together, from returning a broken toaster to taking down world-class supervillains. In Scooby or Not to Scooby, Shaggy and Daphne share the same hotel room. Only one bed is visible. Daphne unpacks her and Shaggy's clothing, and Shaggy quickly repacks his and Daphne's clothing along with Scooby when the ghost shows up. If you freeze frame at the right time, you can see that Shaggy is throwing bras and panties from the drawer to the suitcase. And I'm not going to say anything there. So far, so good. Great. The next part is a little tricky. The next installment, as far as release date, is 13 Goes to Scooby-Doo. Now, what they mean by tricky is pretty much they feel that what they're going to talk about in just a little bit timeline-wise, happened before 13 Ghosts. Even though they came out later, they feel that timeline-wise, it happened before. Kind of like looking back and reading a journal or a diary of what occurred one day, and then all of a sudden you say, okay, let's do a movie on it. All right. This is what they say, and I quote, the next part is a little tricky. The next installment, as far as release date goes, is 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. However, I don't place this in the timeline as immediately following the new Scooby-Doo mysteries. I believe there was a split between Shaggy and Daphne at this point, but we don't know why they split. I believe it was on good terms, and I think it may have been a case of each of them pursuing different goals and different careers. So Daphne became a high-level reporter, and Shaggy went to college. This is where the movie Scooby-Doo and the Boo Brothers come in. Shaggy owns a Jeep and lives in a small house. Perhaps this is the house that he first lived in while he attended Central High with the rest of the gang. I say he went to college because there is a college-type pendant on his bedroom wall that seems to read WVU, West Virginia University, maybe? Makes sense. He receives a letter that he must head south. Next up is the movie Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf. Actually, Ghoul School would be next, but you get the idea. In this movie, Shaggy owns a bigger house and has a girlfriend named Googie. His Jeep is gone, and now he has a hot rod that he races. The rest of the movie is quite forgettable. Well, that all depends on one's opinion. I thought it was okay. I thought it was one of the better ones. Shaggy doesn't seem to take much interest in Googie, still hung up on Daphne perhaps? He does show excitement once when Googie kisses him though. I get the impression that Googie kind of forced Shaggy to take her as a girlfriend. I don't see it lasting. They probably met in college. Okay, so what they're saying there is they feel that Reluctant Werewolf came after the Boo Brothers, and again, I have to look on Wikipedia and see exactly what came before and after. But what they're saying is they pretty much feel that Reluctant Werewolf and Boo Brothers kind of took place between the time that Shaggy might have been graduating or just getting out of college. So there you go. To me, though, I think Reluctant Werewolf, I think, was sort of almost like a pilot to possibly a new show. Because as I've mentioned before, in my video I talked about the Scooby-Doo movies, I pretty much felt that Googie kind of took that positioning of Daphne and all that. Even though she was Googie, kind of kooky a little bit, she took that position of Daphne, if you know what I mean. Anyway, continuing on what this person is trying to say timeline-wise, and I quote, would you hush up? That's my dog barking. Too early to be barking. Sorry about that. Didn't mean. There was just somebody walking by with the dogs, and she heard him. I had a feeling something like that was going to happen. Anyway, like I was trying to say, folks. Continuing on, again, I apologize for the interruption there. But this is what they said next, and I quote, "The next movie in my timeline is Ghoul School. This movie is before 13 Goes to Scooby-Doo. And the reason I say this is the appearance of the new Mystery Machine painted red, black, and silver. Also, Googie is nowhere to be found, which suggests they broke up. Also, the Mystery Machine does not have anything on the inside except seats. No ghost tracking equipment, just Scrappy's weights. This is what tells me that this is before 13 Goes to Scooby-Doo, because the previous movies did not feature this vehicle, even though these movies were made after 13 Goes to Scooby-Doo, and Ghoul School shows the van without the ghost tracking tech on the inside. Thus, 13 Goes to Scooby-Doo must have come after this, and in 13 Goes to Scooby-Doo, Daphne returns. Daphne returns again. Hooray, hooray! Oh my. This time Shaggy and Daphne own a plane and a house together. Proves that Shaggy and Daphne got back together and decided to become closer than ever. The Mystery Machine is fully updated with all the special tech. They have the Mystery Flying Machine as well. They both know how to fly it, which suggests they took flying lessons together. Perhaps Daphne's friend Wendy from Scooby-Doo's Scrappy-Doo show Scary Guy Skeleton taught them. And this is where the Hanna-Barbera series ended with Scooby-Doo, as ABC was full of a-holes who didn't request a season 2 of 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. But at least it ended with Shaggy and Daphne together, But at least it ended with Shaggy and Daphne together as a couple, thus making Shaggy Daphne the final canon pairing. Obviously, I do not include Pup Named Scooby-Doo or any of the WB incarnations in with this timeline. So there you have it. There's my timeline. Okay, and I'm just scanning through here. So, yeah. Basically, what they're saying here, again, is the fact that the old saying that is, to each their own. Am I right? To each their own. And they pretty much feel that, the timeline that they gave in response to what this person was talking about is, if you want to look at a true canon timeline, an official canon timeline, that to this individual and what they just mentioned is indeed the true canon timeline. It's the official canon timeline. And, they might be right, because we've never really gotten no official canon yet of exactly, what came before, what came after. As far as I was concerned, the movies I know came after 13 Ghosts. I know that. But I can kind of understand where they're coming from, too. Because it's kind of like you're writing down in a journal or a diary or something like that, page after page of what happened while you were, let's say, doing what you did in that movie. Like with Boo Brothers, you could have Shaggy writing down what he did, da-da-da-da-da-da. Ghoul School, same thing, da-da-da-da-da-da. This is what happened, da-da-da-da. Page 2, this is what, da-da-da-da. Same with Reluctant Werewolf, da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. This is what happened, da-da-da. Page after page. I can kind of get that, and then maybe you're sitting down with, let's say, family, or with Daphne, if they wanted to say that. Maybe you're sitting down with Daphne, as this person would put it, and said, okay, this is what happened while we were separated. Well, you were doing your thing, I was doing mine. Da-da-da-da. And basically, the movies could be him telling Daphne what happened between the time that they separated. As far as what, and I'm thinking that's what Believe It's going with. Now, some people do respond. One person, now here are some of the responses. Here's one of the responses, and I quote. This is one of the responses to this individual's timeline deal that they did, and I quote, "That's an interesting take on a timeline. However, there's one thing about the late 1980s animated films. They contract each other. I mean, see Reluctant Werewolf and Ghoul School feature. See Reluctant Werewolf and Ghoul School feature two different versions of Dracula. An outright evil one and a somewhat neutral one, with one movie making no references to another one. Or with one movie making no references to another one. It seems that the creators of the show stopped caring about continuity by that time." Okay, now what this person's pointing out is, obviously, if you've watched these movies, that the Draculas are different. And that is true. They are indeed different. That is true. They are indeed different. But it all depends. Because sometimes, with Hanna-Barbera continuity, you can have one or more Draculas. All right. Next up, another response from an individual that's a Shaggy Daphne supporter. This is what they said. LOL. When a show has so many incarnations, I think that continuity goes out the window. That's just the really that's just the reality of a long-running cartoon. Bottom line, it is laziness, but it can also be understandable when you have 300 plus episodes to keep track of everything. Next person responds. The next person responds is goes like this, and I quote: "The way I see it, Hanna-Barbera always wanted to pair Shaggy and Daphne. It's rooted in their history of cartoons. The weak, strange male character is paired with a strong, hot female chick. You can see this most, if not, you could see this in most, if not all, of the shows: the Flintstones, Jetsons, Yogi Bear, and others. The male character is weak, weird, not attractive. Basically, the average. Uh, Hold on, let me see if I can get this right. Basically, the average guy, like Shaggy, and he ends up with a strong, attractive female character, Daphne. The chemistry works. Daphne. The character. The chemistry worked for them. That's just how it is. Then Disney came around the corner with the forever criticism that attractive people should get together, even if they may not have nothing in common or anything. I dare anyone to tell me just one Disney movie, show, cartoon where the couples on hot. Just name one. So they came in, stepped on everything, gave Shaggy, Scooby fan, and a backseat, and guess what? Made a series of silly movies that you aren't going to care about. Some is good, but it feels like it's missing a lot. They erased the timeline and just made it pivotal life like The Simpsons. To the present, Hanna-Barbera's Scooby-Doo remains the canon Scooby-Doo incarnation. Everything else feels like filler. Okay, so what this person is saying, and it is kind of obviously true, basically when it comes to Hanna-Barbera, the formula was, hey, let's take the strange, unusual male and let's pair him with an attractive, an attractive, level-headed female. You know, for example, like with Yogi Bear. Yogi's always had this weakness for picnic baskets and always trying to steal them, and, instead of doing the natural thing and hunt for stuff, hunt for berries and fish and all that. And then here you have somebody like Cindy, who's she's very attractive to Yogi, no doubt about that. Been in love with him since obviously they were cubs, which is the truth, and is very level-headed because in Invasion of the Space Bears, she pretty much tells Yogi, hey, you got to be careful what you're doing, or else Ranger Smith is going to send you to Siberia. So, very level-headed. And you kind of get what they're talking about, the possibility that they wanted to put Shaggy and Daphne together as a pairing. Now, the timeline poster, if you will, the original timeline poster, the OTP, if you will, says this in response to some of the some of those responses. This is the response. The original timeline poster, the original TP, if you will, OTP. This is what they say, and I quote: "Probably a case of different Draculas. One of the episodes with just Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy had a different Dracula, I think, as did the new Scooby-Doo movie Halloween episode. Those could all be descendants from the same line. We probably haven't seen the true Dracula in Scooby-Doo. Reluctant Werewolf kind of supports that this is Dracula's Reluctant Werewolf kind of shows this kind of supports it, this as Dracula tomes tome shows that different people feel the roles of the monsters at different times. Pretty much because, okay, so pretty much what they're saying there is reluctant werewolf kind of indicates that when one generation of monster is done being monstrous, it passes on to the next to another individual. So there you go. And they continue on, and I quote, "The writers, and more to the point, Hanna-Barbera, were probably not thinking of Scooby-Doo in terms of being a long-lasting series, meaning a series that would be replayed again and again in the future. Back then, you just made cartoons for the moment. They would deliver one story per episode, and that would be it. There was probably never any thought about continuity. Even the new Scooby-Doo movies breaks continuity. In the Davy Jones episode, Shaggy is allergic to hay. The reason is so they could reference this later as a clue. Dumb reason. Yet in the Jonathan Winters episode, there is hay all over the place and Shaggy is fine. There was also hay in the episode Jeepers, It's the Creeper. Shaggy even gets bundled up in a hay bale and has no reaction." Alright, now the other response to that, and there's a lot. The next responder says this: "You're right. Most of the cartoons didn't have continuation back then, but that didn't mean that it wasn't attempted. In fact, I go as far as to say they were pioneers of the time. Cartoons like the Flintstones, Jetsons, and even the Perils of Penelope Pitstop are proof of this. The only problem is that fans back then didn't want these kind of cliffhangers. They didn't like it. They didn't want to think about cartoons like we do today. For example, the Perils of Penelope Pitstop was supposed to end every episode in a cliffhanger. For the next episode, they renounced the idea before its debut. That's how it is. It doesn't matter that they didn't try by doing this." Another person mentioned, and I quote, "Why we can think that Scooby-Doo has a continuity timeline. My thought is because the series why we can think that Scooby-Doo has continuity timeline? My thought is because series like Scooby-Doo, new Scooby-Doo show, Scooby-Doo movies, and 13 Ghosts were existing. From those series we know that what the gang do after move on with the mystery-solving hobby. Shaggy and Daphne worked together as reporters, Fred as a mystery writer, and Velma with NASA. Unfortunately, this further set up later. Unfortunately, this future setup later was copycatted by Zombie Island into their own timeline for a worse future. And another thing worth explaining is in episode Happy Birthday Scooby-Doo. Shaggy explained that during the time they're solving the Red Skull mystery, it happened years ago. And in 13 Ghosts, Shaggy and Daphne looks much older compared to previous series. I personally think that the creator of Reluctant Werewolf, Boo Brothers, and Ghoul Schools doesn't care about the timeline. They just took the recent elements of 13 Ghosts, such as Shaggy's different clothes, a girlfriend, a red van, and real ghosts. Imagine if in those movies Shaggy wears his standard green shirt and brown pants. What do you think? And then they kind of explain that one Disney show, for an example, that has sort of a Shaggy Daphne kind of thing is Kim Possible, which I mentioned before. And then this is what this another, and this is what that we're gonna call him DSR responds. Not the not who's not the timeline poster, but we'll just call him DSR DSR, and he says, "Touche. I might have jumped the gun there because today all kinds of shows are springing from Disney with continuity. Let's say before the 90s, that's when Hanna-Barbera made the 13 Ghosts. Disney started continuities in the late 80s, I think. The Scooby-Doo movies, older ones, yeah, I do agree that they're probably... Okay, the Scooby-Doo movies, older ones, yeah, I do agree that they probably in it... That they probably in... That they probably it in new incarnations to be more recognizable. Since the shows they were... Since the shows they were about... Since the shows they... Oh, since the shows then were about the red shirt and red van. They were probably trying to show that it was probably a continuity. They were probably trying to show that it was probably a continuity. All in all, I don't think it was a bad idea at all. The movies looked better and better. Next, next responder says, "Has anyone seen the finale yet? I sort of like talking about it." Okay, it's like, has anyone seen the finale yet? I sort of feel like talking about it. It sort of had a finale feel. If someone was to tell me that Shaggy and Daphne's hands touched 3 times, I would have been very happy. But for some reason, didn't feel too happy. I don't know. I don't know why. So has anyone seen it yet? And then one person responds, and then the next person responds to that, saying, "I saw it. Despite my interest in new agisms, I didn't feel like it belonged in this new show, and it was a bit of a cop-out altogether. Not to mention a show called Mighty Max had the exact same ending 2 decades ago." And then it's just about them talking about the whole situation with the new MI show. Anyway, I will provide a link down below, but again, to each their own. And, you could tell by what this individual does with the timeline and what they said about it, basically how they feel with the timeline and how they feel it all fits into place officially in their eyes. But do you guys agree with it? Do you agree with what they said? Do you think the timeline fits in, or is it completely different? Let me know what you guys think. I'm sorry this took very long to do. I apologize for that. That is my fault. I'm sorry for my dog barking earlier. She just heard another dog outside with their owner, and that's all I'm going to say about that. So let me know what you guys think. Take your time listening to this, and I will talk to you all later.